Hello, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new. My name is Kyla, and today we are going to be talking about 10 of the best audiobooks that I have ever listened to. Over the past 2 years, I have become such a huge fan of audiobooks. I don't know why I didn't really dabble in them before, but the past 2 years, I have really gotten into them, and I have listened to some incredible books on audio. And some of them are actually even better on audio than they are in print. So I wanted to share with you today some of my favorites. These are in no particular order. These are all ones that I highly recommend and that I just really enjoyed, whether that was for the narration, whether that was for having multiple cast members, or whether they included some sort of sound effect to them. I'll go over it all with you, and let's just go ahead and dive into the list. So I made a list on my phone. Technically, there's more than 10 on this list, but I did include just a few authors to check out as opposed to specific audiobooks, because these authors, all their books on audio are amazing. So we will get there. I will let you know which ones they are. But the first book that I wanted to share with you was Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This book is so much better on audio than it is in print. First of all, you get a full cast, an entire cast. Literally everyone has their own voice, which in a book like this, where you have such a diverse array of characters, I feel like it's so important to have different narrators, and especially because they all have their own specific personality. I just think this book was like screaming for audio, and they delivered. It's so good. It's so much better in print. There's music involved, which of course, if you know anything about Daisy Jones and the Six, it follows the evolution of a band, kind of like their rise and fall, including a love story and a love kind of triangle and just a little hint of like mystery happening, and it just, I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible. It's actually being turned into a show. I cannot wait. I cannot wait. But because of the fact that obviously this story includes a band, there is music in the audiobook, and it's just a superior experience. So if you have not read Daisy Jones and the Six, or you read it but you didn't really enjoy it, I highly recommend a reread or just to check this out on audio. It will change your experience. The next one that I have to share with you is actually a series, but also just slash an author. But I will cover the series first, and it's A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. If you know me, you know this is no surprise. I recommend this audio series, especially the first one, because it's by far the superior of the series. I mean, I think you should round it out, but that's just my opinion. But if anything, just the first one, which is A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. Oh my goodness, this is one of the best audiobooks that I have ever listened to. I love it, I love it, I love it, I love it so much. Again, there is a cast of characters. I think some of the narrators do multiple voices, but they all each have their own unique voice, and I really love that. Also, this book includes a podcast element, which is really like the bread and butter of this audiobook, because the podcast element is so apparent in the audiobook. Everything from phone calls sounding like phone calls to tape recorders. You can hear the button being pushed. You can hear rewind and the tape playing. You can hear computer noises. Like, everything is so present in this audiobook, which just makes the experience that much more elevated. It's so good. Let alone you have like the suspense and the mystery happening throughout this book that is really showcased in this audiobook. I think it does a really good job of creating suspense throughout it. And then, like I said, you have these amazing characters who all have their own voice, and it's truly just one of the best that I have ever listened to. It's also just such an easy listen. It is one of those books that I do think you have to kind of pay attention to, as opposed to just being able to like flit around and doing whatever you want to do and like half pay attention to it. Because it's a mystery and because you're kind of unfolding and there are a bunch of characters, it is one that you want to be a little bit more enthralled with, but the experience and the sound effects make that so easy to do. Like, this is hands down one of my favorites and always my top recommendation when people say that they have never really listened to fiction before on audio and they want to get into it. This is one of the go-tos that I always recommend to people. It is young adult, but it's not super young adult, and it just is such an incredible listen. I recommend it to everyone, so if you haven't checked it out, I definitely recommend doing so. Like I said, I really liked the whole series on audio. It rounds it out completely. I loved it. But also, on that note, Holly Jackson's books in general, just on audio, are incredible. Her new one I just listened to, 5 Survive, and even though it wasn't my favorite book, I really actually didn't enjoy this book. The audiobook was still so good. Again, we had this cast of characters, we had sound effects happening, so it's just how she goes about doing her audiobooks. So I know that I can always recommend her books just in general as audiobooks, and like I said, even because I didn't enjoy 5 Survive doesn't mean that you won't enjoy it. So definitely check out Holly Jackson, but specifically the Good Girl's Guide to Murder series. You will not be disappointed. And then we have a book that I was actually not sure that I was going to enjoy on audio. I was like, is this really going to like toy with my experience here? Because this book is kind of infamous and I don't want to ruin my experience in doing so. But at the same time, I just had something in my gut telling me, you know what, no, listen to the audiobook while you're reading it, and that's an experience that I highly recommend. I know it kind of seems like counterproductive, like, okay, most people will do either or, they'll either listen or they'll read, but the experience of listening while reading, especially a book that's, I'm sorry if you can hear snowplows in the background, by the way. It snowed today. The plows are out. I can't do anything about it. Especially if it's a book that you think it's going to take you a little bit of brain power to get into or has a little bit more depth to it. An audiobook can really help immerse yourself more into that experience, so I highly recommend. And this was one of those ones where I was like, ooh, it could ruin my experience, but it also could elevate my experience, and it so elevated it, and that is Bunny by Mona Awad. I had first tried to just read this physically, and it was an okay experience, but I was like, this book is so infamous. Like, there's no way that I am not enjoying this as much as I should be. Like, I know I'm going to love this book, so what is it that's missing? So I decided to check out the audiobook as well and listen while I was reading. Such a different experience, and one that I highly recommend, especially because the voices that are done for the bunnies are so spot on. It is uncanny. It's exactly what I was picturing in my head, and to hear it come to life and to have that experience while reading just made this that much more fun. Also, this book is so dark and twisted, and it just was like such an experience on audio, but especially like the main thing that I got out of this and the enjoyment that I got out of this was the voices that are done for the bunnies, which are the clique of girls that are bubbly and peppy, and you know, they're all like have these really high squeaky voices, and it just made it so much more enjoyable and so fun, but also like that much more dark and twisty because they sound so creepy and like they shouldn't, like no normal person talks this way, and it just made it so much more fun. So I highly recommend listening while reading, but if you have to choose one or the other, I would say go ahead and listen. Oh, I don't know. I can't choose. Just take my advice and listen while you read it. The next audiobook that I absolutely love was Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. This is another one of those where I was like, I don't know if this is going to hurt or help my experience in this book, but I decided to check it out anyways. Sometimes I will just start listening. If I don't like the narrator, then I'll just go to the physical one. But if I think that it's going to enhance my experience, then I will keep listening, of course. You can always play a sample, by the way, too. Like almost all the apps and everything, they can all play a sample. I should mention too, I should have said this at the beginning, I use Libby for most of my audiobooks. I don't pay for any services or anything. I use Libby to get them through my local library and the library through like the city that's closest to me. Most big cities you can get library subscriptions to, like online, like the one closest to you. So I have one for my local library and one for the city near me, which is Boston. So I never have to pay for audiobooks. I don't pay for them. I use Libby. Sometimes you do have to wait. Sometimes that's a little bit frustrating, especially if you want to read a book right here, right now, but I just try to always be like ahead of the game and decide what I want to read like in advance. But regardless, back to Under the Whispering Door. Again, like I said, I wasn't sure if this was going to hurt or help my experience, but it helped it. I really enjoyed this on audio. It was fun. It's not anything that was like over the top. There's not sound effects or anything. There are multiple narrators, so there's different voices for the characters. But overall, I just felt like this was such a heartbreaking, kind of inspirational story that I just felt was so impactful on audio, and that's why I'm recommending it. I think the messages get portrayed a little bit more through the audiobook, and like the emotions behind everything I think get portrayed a little bit more on the audiobook. Like as you're reading it, you can obviously feel the emotions coming off the page, but to listen to it is just a whole different experience, and I really enjoyed it. And because this is a lighter fantasy, it's not anything that's going to be confusing or hard to read. There's nothing on the page that you're just not gonna understand if you listen to it versus reading it. It's so easy to understand, it's so easy to follow, and again, just also the quirky relationships that happen in here, like hearing the sarcasm behind the characters in voice was so fun. And then, like I said, having the emotions behind everything that was happening just kind of elevated it for me, and I really enjoyed my audio experience with this book. And then we have another author to check out. Again, I can't just recommend one because I think that this author's books do so well on audio, and that is Reid. I have not listened to We Spread, so I don't know about that one, but I can say that I'm Thinking of Ending Things and Foe were both incredible on audio, and I would highly recommend them, especially I'm Thinking of Ending Things. That book on audio like takes the creep factor up like 50 notches. It's definitely like ominous and creepy while you're reading it, but listening to it is like night and day difference. It is so creepy. The scenes in the car of them talking are so creepy, and then the whole thing with like the fingernails at dinner, that's creepy, and then the ending is like heart-pounding, this anxious feeling, and you can feel it coming through the audiobook, and it's so good. It's so good. The narrator does an incredible job, and just the overall experience of this book, I found it so much more enjoyable on audio than in print. This is one that I definitely, like, you don't have to read in tandem. I would just say check out the audiobook. Again, for Foe as well. Foe was incredible on audio. I don't think you're getting anything out of print that you're not getting in the audio, and the audio is just, it's so good. It's superior, in my opinion. If I had to recommend one or the other, definitely the audiobook for sure. That creep factor, oh my god. Everything about it is just so creepy, and it's just, it brings the horror, the type of horror, to a whole nother level. And speaking of horror, I have quite a few other horror books that I would recommend on audio. I just find horror books so fun on audio because I feel like they just, whether they include music or whether they include sound effects or just like the way that certain voices are done, it just is such a different experience. And like, yeah, you can create those voices in your head, but hearing it, oh, it's just so something different. So one of the next books that I recommend that is a horror that I think is so good on audio is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. This is a long one. The audiobook is a bit of a doozy. I think it's around 12 or 13 hours, but it reads so quickly. I listen to a lot of my audiobooks on 2x speed, if not more than that, because I just find voices so slow. And this one, I definitely think is one that you can listen to a little bit faster, but what makes this one is not only like the dialect in the voices, because you have this kind of southern charm going on, so all of the narrators have that kind of southern drawl to them, or the ones that are supposed to. There is a character from Boston. Her Boston accent is terrible. I'm not gonna lie. It's not good. But the rest of them, I could overlook it because the rest of the southern accents are done really well. But there's one certain character in this book, I'm sure you can guess who it is, whose voice is so creepy and just added so much to the audiobook. Oh my god, it was just so creepy. And just every single time the person talked, you were like, just got chills. And certain parts of this book, hearing them out loud, oh my gosh, so disgusting, but so awesome at the same time. I loved it. And again, with horror, I think it just adds to that element of anxiety. Instead of just reading it on the page, you're listening to it unfold, and it just is so creepy. It's so scary, and it just gives you goosebumps, and I love that. I want the horror books to gross me out, but also like leave me with that ooh feeling. And this book definitely does that on audio. And I have a couple of others because, like I said, horror is just the genre that's so good. And this one I actually literally just read, but I have to recommend it because I loved it so much, and that is Mexican Gothic. I thought this was so good on audio. I'm also currently in tandem listening to The Hacienda, which so far is also really good on audio, but I just finished this one. I haven't finished the other one, so I can't say that one, but side note, that one's really good too. But this one I really loved. Again, just added to the creep factor. There's this family involved in this story and inside this house, and hearing the audio narration of this family and what they were doing just added to the chill factor so much more. And I love that. And as things were unfolding, it just got creepier and creepier, and that ominous feeling and that scared, anxious feeling just gets worse and worse, but also like better and better. And I just thought it was so good. So I highly recommend it. And then one of like my top 2 favorite horror audiobooks like of all time, and also just books in general of all time, was The Weight of Blood by Tiffany D. Jackson. This book is so incredible on audio. I do not even know where to begin. I guess I would just say that first of all, we have, again, a cast of characters. I just love that. I love when everyone has a voice, and it's exactly what I pictured. But the narrator for Madison just brings her character to life. Her voice is very quiet, it's very mousy, it's very shy, and that just elevates the experience and what she's going through, and you can tell that she's been through some shit because she's not a loudmouth. She's very much like in her own bubble, trying to just like stay back, and the narrator just does an incredible job of bringing that feeling to life. And then this book also includes a podcast element as well, which I just think is so good on audio. In between the chapters of the story, you've had this kind of like true crime podcast that is investigating what happened at prom at this high school, like however many years ago, and it sounds exactly like a current day true crime podcast. It sounds so good, and I just feel like it reads so much better through the ears than it does through the eyes. So highly recommend it for that. And then also just the anxiety again, and just feeling what all of these students were going through, especially for Madison, because as things start unfolding, man, my heart was pounding throughout this entire audiobook. And this is one of those audiobooks where I was trying to do other things and like be productive, and I just kept finding myself like sitting down or standing still and just listening, because it just enthralls you. Like, you cannot, it's like one of the, like, you can't look away. Like, you can't not do anything. You just need to like sit and focus on it and hear what's happening. One, to like really get the impact of what's happening, but also you just can't, like, you can't look away. You just have to keep listening and know what's going on, and you don't want to like be distracted and miss something. You just want to be in it, and you want to be in the story, and I just cannot recommend this audiobook enough. And then my last horror recommendation on audio is Pet Sematary by Stephen King. This book is narrated by Michael C. Hall, and if you don't know who that is, it's the guy who plays Dexter. And oh my goodness, him narrating this book is such an experience. It just is like a movie in your mind. And I know this book is a movie, obviously, but it is one of those things where it just is truly like a cinematic experience, especially obviously him being an actor himself. He's able to do different voices very well, especially the neighbor across the street. It was spot on from the guy in the movie. Like, almost better, in my opinion, and that was like that guy's real voice. This was so good. I don't know what else to say other than it truly was like a cinematic experience. And I know they have a lot of those audiobooks now that are done by actors, or like a full cast of actors, or they actually do sound like movies. I don't mean it in that sense. I just mean that his voice was perfect for this book and for these roles, and he really, because of the way his voice sounds, it just created that ominous feeling throughout this book, and that like over just looming dread that happens through this book, and also obviously the heartbreak and what the father was going through, and it just is so good. It's so good. So if you didn't like Pet Sematary as like a read, definitely recommend checking it out on audio. I won't lie, this isn't like my favorite book of all time. It's like, I just thought it was okay. I personally think the movie is a little bit more enjoyable. However, I do think the audiobook is by far superior to the written form of this book. So, if you haven't read it and you've been wanting to, I highly recommend checking out the audiobook. I think it's going to be such a better experience, and I feel like you will get so much more out of it. And then my last recommendation is another author recommendation, and that is Lucy Foley. Foley. I've heard it pronounced both ways, and I'm not gonna lie, I don't know which one is right. I'm gonna say Lucy Foley because that's just how it sounds in my brain. But I recommend all of her books on audio. I think that she's another one of those authors that does such an incredible job at making sure her books are produced on audio in such an incredible way. I've listened to The Guest List, I've listened to The Paris Apartment, I have listened to a few others, I can't remember which ones they are right now, but they have all been really good experiences, again with a full cast of characters, at least on most of them, at least the ones that I've listened to. They've all had a full cast of characters, and I just love that. I love when everyone has their own voice. Again, I just think it elevates the experience that much more. And because they're thrillers, it just is such a fun experience, especially when they all have their own voice. It's kind of like you get to know the characters a little bit more, you get a little bit more invested in the story because you're hearing them and what they're going through as opposed to just reading it. And I think that that is such a special experience, especially in thrillers when you're trying to figure out who you trust and who done it. Hearing their voices is totally different and might end up changing your theories a bit as you listen to them as opposed to reading them. I've had that happen a few times and I love that. I love it so much. If I had to pick one on where to start, I would definitely suggest The Guest List. I think this one was done incredibly on audio because you're kind of going through this whole group of friends and the whole thing in with the wedding and everything like that. It was just a really fun experience. I loved it, and I thought that the audiobook was just really well done. So that's where I would say to start. But again, almost all of her audiobooks have a full cast of characters, and they just do such an incredible job at bringing the stories and the thrillers to life, and it's just so freaking fun. So those are all of my audiobook recommendations, at least for now. I can definitely see myself doing this again in the future, maybe in a couple of months or so, as I'm listening to more audiobooks and as my recommendation list is growing, because obviously the more I listen, the more I want to share with you. And I just think audiobooks are such a fun experience. Like I said, whether you listen to them alone, whether you listen to them while you're reading, whatever the experience it is, it truly can change your reading experience for the good or for the bad. And I just love that. So if you would love to see another one of these, be sure to give this video a thumbs up. Also, comment down below what your favorite audiobook is, whether that's nonfiction, fiction, whatever. That way we can all get some recommendations from each other. If you enjoyed this video and want to see others like it, be sure to subscribe to my channel and turn on the bell so you never miss a video. And I will see you in my next one. Bye!
With you and I, the future